Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. 8 EU leaders, including a Polish Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, are urging Brussels to tighten visa rules for former Russian soldiers entering the Schengen zone. Could Russian combat veterans pose a security risk inside Europe? Well, we discussed this with with Andreas Umland, Policy Fellow at the European Policy Institute. Mr. Umland, welcome to TV World. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me again.
Right, so we've had 8 EU leaders writing to Ursula von der Leyen and Mr. Costa. What are they asking for?
Well, this request is actually quite natural. The veterans of the war will be a threat. I think not only a threat for countries that they may visit, they are also a threat, in fact, for Russia itself, because they are traumatized, they are militarized, and it's only natural that these sort of people who have probably committed also crimes, or some of them at least have committed crimes in Ukraine, are not allowed to enter EU territory. And they could be also instruments of Russian hybrid warfare in the West. They could take over certain tasks. So they are a real threat in many ways.
Right, so I mean, it's not just soldiers that committed crimes in Ukraine, is it? I mean, Putin emptied his jails to put soldiers on the front line in Ukraine. Some estimates say 180,000 convicted criminals were put into the Russian army to fight in Ukraine. Now, what I'm finding difficult to understand, Mr. Umland, is that for these people to enter the European Union, they have to apply for visas, and surely their criminal background would be discovered during that process, would it not?
That's an open question to me, and I believe that in general the rules for entry into the EU by Russian citizens, in a way, unfortunately, I would say, have to be become much more restrictive. And if there is no serious reason to let these people in, if they are, for instance, not themselves politically prosecuted in Russia, perhaps in general, the visa rules for Russia may now have to be specified, because I think we will see an increase of hybrid warfare, and whether these are veterans from the war or other Russian citizens, some of them can be suspected to be then executors of hybrid threats on the territory of the EU, because Russia is trying not to start a real war with NATO. It's very much against the European Union, against NATO, against their support for Ukraine, but it's also afraid of an extension of the war, of an inclusion of NATO countries into the war. Therefore, it will go to hybrid threats and to sabotage, to secret operations that will not trigger Article 5 of the Washington Treaty that established NATO, and that is about the mutual aid of the 32 NATO member countries.
Right. Well, I mean, Russia's been conducting a hybrid war against the European Union and countries outside the EU almost since the invasion of Ukraine began. Is there evidence that there are already former soldiers from the Russian military in the EU actually conducting these operations? I mean, what has brought this question up now?
I guess there have been already cases discovered, which then brought to this issue to the attention of these governments that have now turned to the EU to do something about it. The problem here is, of course, that these records of these people may not be public. it may not be easy to establish whether somebody had this background. In any way, as I said, I think the confrontation between Russia and the West is only increasing, and it will further increase on the one side. On the other side, I think Russia is interested not to go into a direct confrontation with NATO, and that's why we can expect that that many of the, or at least some of the people who are coming from Russia will be actually agents, whether they are former soldiers or not. And their task will be to do espionage, sabotage, some sort of tasks that they will then fulfill on the territory of the EU.
Right. Now, countries like the Baltic states, Finland and so on, are very wary of this issue, and they've already started imposing bans on issuing visas to Russian nationals. Surely this is something that the EU doesn't need to get involved with. I mean, all countries on the border, on the eastern flank of NATO, for example, could simply stop issuing these visas to Russian nationals on their own, couldn't they? Why drag the EU into it?
I think it would be much better if that would be a unified action by all members of the EU or by all members of the Schengen area, in fact, so that the potential agents of Russia may not use the liberalization of the visa regime for their actions. So, one could imagine a situation in which somebody gets a visa from a Western embassy and then enters Poland with this visum and then does something in Poland. So the EU indeed should take care of this issue. That is one of the purposes of the EU, and there's no human right, so to say, to travel into a country. There's a human right to leave your country, but I think these usually cited human rights violations that this would then constitute is not really true here. We are in a warlike situation, and consequently, also the visa regime should be adapted to this situation.
Right. So when you say adapted, what do you think needs to be done here? I mean, is this an end to the freedom of movement within the Schengen zone?
Within the Schengen zone, perhaps not, but with regard to Russian citizens, I think something has to be done, and there may be also, let's say, Russian citizens who have double citizenship that can be suspected to work for Russia. The confrontation is escalating, and it will, as long as Putin is in power, or as long as this regime is in power, it's easy to predict that the tensions will become more and more, and therefore also these hybrid actions will intensify. As I said, for Russia, this is a very important confrontation because the Western help, the EU's help for Ukraine, is hindering Russia to conquer Ukraine on the one side, but Russia doesn't want to get into a direct fight with these NATO countries, so it will use hybrid methods to the most possible extent, and it will use agents in the EU to act on behalf of Russia in one way or another, and that cannot be simply ignored. The EU was not made for this sort of confrontation, and its policies therefore will have to adapt.
Yes, and certainly, they look as though they will have to adapt. But in order to get a change in EU policy, will there be a need for unanimity? And if there is, isn't there a risk that Hungary and Slovakia are going to prevent this change from taking place?
Frankly, I'm not quite sure how this for the Schengen area and for the visum issues works. But if that is indeed the case, then this could be a problem. But I think the security issues here and the security concerns of the countries will be taken seriously. And if countries like Hungary and Slovakia would behave in a way that would threaten the security of countries like Germany and Poland and all the Baltic countries, I think that would be a very serious issue within the EU. This is not just about economics, but it's about material security, and I think there will be then instruments to come to a common approach.
So are you of the opinion then, Mr. Umland, that there is a broad EU support for this change and that it is likely to happen sooner rather than later?
Yes, I expect that to happen because, as I said, there may be some countries who have a different view of this. Let's say countries like Spain or Portugal, for which these issues are not as salient, or countries like Slovakia or Hungary that just may have a different relationship with Moscow. But because we're talking here about security and about possible, very serious possible actions by Russia on EU territory, I think there will be a solution for that. And even if countries then oppose this, I think this will be overcome, because the war cannot, I mean, these hybrid threats cannot be negated, and this hybrid war is already happening. So the arguments are going to be very strong from the countries that want that to happen.
Do you think there's a likelihood, or a possibility at least, that once this process starts, there is going to be an effort made to find those who are already in the EU, already in taking advantage of freedom of movement in Schengen, and getting them out?
Yes, I hope so. This is then, of course, a matter for the security agencies, the national security agencies. Maybe there will even come a time when the European Union will create an intelligence agency, a security agency, because times are changing, and maybe we will need something on the EU level as well. For now, this is clearly something to be resolved on the national level or through the cooperation of the national intelligence agencies.
Indeed, it does depend on that. Mr. Umland, as always, thank you very much for sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a good evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me again.
That brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away. Lots more coming up. Goodbye.